This happened only a few days before I left for college last summer, during my final week living at home. I've gone back and forth on whether or not I should even share this story because I still get anxious thinking about it. More than anything, I can't stop wondering if the person involved ever came back. My parents had recently moved into a smaller house after I graduated high school. They'd talked for years about downsizing once I moved out, and as soon as I was accepted into college, they finally went through with it. Because of the timing, I barely had any experience with the new place. I'd only stayed there a handful of times before everything happened. When they first bought the house, they gave me a quick walkthrough. My mom pointed out some of the older features while my dad explained random maintenance stuff I'd probably never need to know. One thing they both specifically mentioned was that the house didn't have a basement. According to them, there was only a small crawl space beneath the house for pipes and utilities. That detail became important later. My parents left for a week-long vacation the night before everything started, leaving me alone in the house. The first strange thing happened on a Tuesday night. I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when I heard a faint tapping sound coming from underneath the floorboards. At first, I ignored it. Older houses make noises constantly, especially at night. I figured it was probably the pipes cooling down or maybe rainwater shifting through the drainage system. But the tapping kept going. It was steady. Rhythmic. Tap. 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 Not random creaks. Not settling wood. I sat up and listened for a minute before getting out of bed. My room was on the first floor, so the noise sounded like it was coming directly beneath me. I walked around trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, but no matter where I stood, it sounded like it was underneath the entire room. That's when I started getting uncomfortable. There shouldn't have been anything down there except a cramped crawl space. Eventually, after maybe 20 minutes, the tapping stopped completely. The silence afterward almost felt worse. Still, I convinced myself it had to be some kind of animal and eventually managed to fall asleep. The next day, I barely thought about it. Until that night. Around the same time, the tapping started again. Only this time, it was louder. It sounded closer somehow. I remember pulling my blanket tighter around myself while staring at the ceiling, trying to rationalize what I was hearing. I didn't want to overreact over house noises, especially while alone. Eventually, I forced myself to ignore it and went to sleep. By the third night, though, there was no more denying that something was seriously wrong. The tapping returned, but now there were other sounds mixed in with it. Scraping. Dragging. Slow grinding noises. It sounded like something heavy was being pulled across concrete underneath the house. At one point, I heard what genuinely sounded like fingernails dragging across wood. I sat frozen in the dark listening to it for nearly an hour. Every logical explanation I came up with immediately fell apart. The noises were too deliberate. Too consistent. They sounded purposeful. The following morning, I called my parents and explained everything. My dad immediately assumed there was an animal trapped beneath the house. He told me to check the crawl space entrance outside and make sure nothing had gotten in. I really didn't want to. But eventually I grabbed a flashlight and went outside. The crawl space entrance was beneath the back porch. I had to kneel in dirt and dead leaves just to get the panel open. The entire time, I felt sick with anxiety. But when I looked inside, there was nothing there. No animals. No movement. No signs that anything had been living there. My dad seemed satisfied with that answer and told me not to stress about it. I wish I had listened. Later that afternoon, I decided to walk around the outside of the house to see if there was another opening somewhere. That's when I noticed a pile of old construction debris stacked along the side yard. Wood planks, concrete blocks, rolled up tarps. It looked like leftover renovation material from years earlier. I'd seen it before, but never paid much attention to it. For some reason, though, I decided to move a few things around. And underneath all of it, hidden almost perfectly behind the debris, was an old storm door. My stomach dropped. The door had clearly been painted over years ago. It blended almost perfectly into the side of the house. If the construction materials hadn't been stacked there, I probably never would have noticed it. I pulled the door open. Concrete stairs disappeared into darkness. A basement. I just stood there staring for several seconds. My parents had no idea this place even existed. Every instinct in my body told me not to go down there. But I did anyway. The second I reached the bottom of the stairs, I realized someone had been living there. Empty food wrappers covered the floor. Water bottles were piled into corners. Old blankets were shoved against one wall. But that wasn't the worst part. The wooden support beams were covered in scratches and drawings. Tallies carved into the wood. Distorted faces. Animals with human features. Symbols I didn't recognize. The drawings looked violent. Unstable. Like they'd been made by somebody completely detached from reality. I immediately backed toward the stairs. I didn't stay down there longer than maybe 30 seconds. The second I got outside, I called my parents. They were horrified. My dad kept asking if I was absolutely sure nobody was still down there. I told him no. At least, I thought no. He said they were cutting the vacation short and driving home immediately. After hanging up, I drove to a hardware store and bought a heavy-duty padlock. I chained the storm door shut, convinced I'd solved the problem. That night, I woke up to violent banging outside. Not knocking. Banging. Metal rattled so hard I thought the storm door might actually break. My heart instantly started pounding. I couldn't move. I knew exactly what it was. Someone had come back. The noise went on for maybe 15 seconds before suddenly stopping. I slowly walked to the window and peeked outside. Just in time to see a figure sprinting across the backyard. I couldn't make out any details. Just a dark silhouette disappearing into the night. The police searched the property later that night, including the basement, but found nothing useful. My parents came home the next morning and tried reassuring me that everything would be fine. But honestly, leaving for college the next day felt wrong. The idea that somebody had secretly been living underneath my parents' house for who knows how long still terrifies me. And the worst part is knowing that whoever it was clearly came back after finding the entrance locked. Even now, months later, I still think about those drawings sometimes. Especially at night. I grew up in a tiny Montana town not far from the Idaho border. Nothing interesting ever really happens there. Honestly, that's part of why I stayed. This happened years ago, long before smartphones and social media completely took over everything. Back then, news traveled slowly out there, and people mostly kept to themselves. It was late August, right at the end of summer. You could already feel the colder air starting to creep in during the mornings. I was driving my normal route to work when I spotted a light blue sedan parked along the shoulder of the highway. It looked abandoned. No hazard lights. No driver. No movement. The car was angled awkwardly toward the ditch like somebody had pulled over in a hurry. As I drove past, I slowed down enough to look inside. Nobody. I considered stopping, but people broke down out there all the time. I figured whoever owned the car had probably walked to a nearby farmhouse for help. So I kept driving. By the end of the day, I'd almost forgotten about it. Until I drove home. The car was still there. Only now the driver's side door was hanging open. I know for a fact it hadn't been open earlier. That instantly changed the feeling of the situation. I slowed down again, scanning the fields nearby for anybody walking around, but the area was completely empty. No movement. No footprints. Nothing. Once I finally got service again, I called the non-emergency police line and reported it. The operator thanked me and said somebody would check it out. The next morning, the car was gone. That should have been the end of it. About a week later, though, I saw a news report about a missing man whose abandoned vehicle had been found along a rural highway outside town. It was the same car. The report claimed investigators found no evidence of foul play. I didn't fully buy that. Something about the whole situation felt wrong. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Eventually, I called my younger brother, Nathan. He worked as a firefighter in a nearby county, and emergency departments around there usually shared information with each other. Nathan confirmed that local law enforcement had circulated information about the missing person. Apparently, they were organizing a volunteer search. For some reason, I became weirdly invested in helping. Maybe because I'd seen the car myself. Maybe because I felt like I'd witnessed the beginning of something terrible. A few days later, Nathan managed to get me included with one of the search groups. We searched fields, irrigation ditches, and wooded areas surrounding the highway. The terrain looked harmless from the road, but once you were walking through it, it became obvious how easy it would be for someone to disappear. After about an hour, one group radioed that they'd found a structure hidden in the brush. Everybody headed toward them. Buried beneath weeds and overgrowth was an old maintenance shack. It looked abandoned. Half sunk into the earth. From the road, you'd never know it existed. The door was partially open. The lock had been broken. Inside, the air smelled damp and stale. At first, it just looked like an old storage building. But then we started noticing signs somebody had been staying there. Empty water bottles. Food wrappers. Discarded clothing. One of the firefighters called us over after spotting damage along the back wall. There was a clean hole punched through one of the wooden boards. It looked exactly like a bullet hole. The edges were sharp and splintered. Not weather damage. Not rot. A bullet. The officers immediately became more serious. Everyone started searching the area for shell casings, blood, or literally anything else. But there was nothing. Just that single hole. Eventually, the lead officer told everyone except law enforcement to leave. That included the firefighters. Something about his tone made it clear the situation had escalated. Later that night, I called Nathan for answers. But he barely told me anything. All he admitted was that the police had forced everyone out shortly after I left. After that, information completely dried up. The local news stopped mentioning the missing man. Nobody talked about the shack. Weeks passed. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I drove back out there alone. I was positive I remembered where the shack was. But after hours of searching, I couldn't find it. Not even a trace. No structure. No foundation. Nothing. It genuinely messed with my head. The terrain looked identical. Same ditches. Same hills. Same trees. But the shack was gone. The only explanation I could come up with was that somebody had removed it entirely. Still, That felt insane. Why would authorities erase an entire structure over a missing person case? To this day, I still don't know what really happened. Every time summer starts ending and the air turns cold again, I think about that abandoned sedan and that hidden shack sitting in the middle of nowhere. And honestly, part of me still believes we stumbled onto something we were never supposed to find. Last August completely changed how I feel about camping alone. Growing up, my dad used to take me and my older brother camping every year right before summer ended. It became kind of a tradition for us. Even now, in my late 20s, I still try keeping that tradition alive. The problem is that most people I know hate camping. My girlfriend especially. So over the years, I got used to doing solo trips. I actually liked the isolation. For this trip, I found a secluded clearing deep in the woods using Google Maps. It wasn't an official campsite. No roads nearby. No hiking trails. Just a random clearing surrounded by dense forest. Exactly what I wanted. The hike-in took around 2 hours with all my gear. By sunset, I'd set up my tent, started a small fire, and settled in for the night. Honestly, it was perfect. No noise. No people. No distractions. The next morning, I hiked to a nearby river to fish. I spent most of the day there and eventually caught a decent-sized trout. By the time I started heading back toward camp, the sun was already beginning to set. That turned out to be a huge mistake. Within 20 minutes, the woods went completely dark. I had a headlamp, but the trail was rough enough that I had to move slowly. At some point during the hike back, I noticed a faint light moving through the trees ahead of me. It swayed back and forth rhythmically. Like somebody carrying a flashlight. At first, I actually felt relieved. Maybe another camper had gotten lost too. As the light got closer, I called out and asked if they were camping nearby. The light instantly stopped moving. It stayed perfectly still. Then it shut off completely. The darkness afterward felt suffocating. I stood there staring at where the light had been. And then I heard somebody crashing violently through the woods. Not toward me. Not away from me. Across from me. Running hard through the underbrush. The sound alone sent a chill through my entire body. I tried convincing myself that I'd accidentally scared somebody. But the whole interaction felt wrong. Nobody responds like that. I hurried back to camp and skipped cooking entirely. I just climbed into my tent and tried distracting myself with a book. Eventually, I fell asleep. Sometime during the night, I woke up suddenly. No idea why. Everything sounded normal at first. Wind through trees. Crickets. Leaves shifting. I figured I just needed to use the bathroom. So I unzipped the tent and leaned outside. Moonlight covered the clearing. And standing roughly 15 feet away was a person. Completely still. Just watching my tent. My body instantly locked up. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. The silhouette didn't move either. It just stood there. I realized whoever it was had probably heard me unzip the tent. Meaning they knew I'd seen them. That's when panic finally snapped me back into motion. I grabbed the switchblade I kept near my sleeping bag and shouted, asking who they were. The second I yelled, the figure charged directly at me. Full sprint. No hesitation. And while running at me, they let out this awful scream. It sounded human. But wrong. Like pure rage. Before I could react, the guy slammed into me. We hit the ground hard and started wrestling beside the tent. He wasn't punching. He was clawing at my face. Literally clawing like some kind of animal. I managed to swing the knife upward and sliced his hand. That immediately changed everything. The man shrieked and stumbled backward before bolting into the woods. I could still hear him crashing through trees while making these horrible screaming noises. I sat there shaking for several minutes. Blood covered my hands and face. I honestly thought he was going to come back. I considered hiking to my car immediately, but trying to navigate unfamiliar woods in complete darkness felt suicidal. So instead, I spent the rest of the night sitting awake inside my tent with the knife in my hand. Every sound outside made my heart race. By sunrise, I packed everything as fast as possible and practically jogged back to my car. I drove out of there without stopping once. I thought about calling the police. But realistically, what was I supposed to tell them? That I'd been illegally camping in the middle of nowhere and got attacked by some lunatic? I figured nothing would come from it. Still, the entire experience changed something in me. What scares me most isn't even the attack itself. It's the fact that somebody had been out there silently tracking me through the woods in complete darkness. And judging by the way he acted, I honestly don't think that man was mentally stable at all. I haven't gone solo camping since. And I genuinely don't know if I ever will again. Back in late 2016, I decided to take a solo trip into a remote section of national forest about 4 hours from where I lived. I'd recently become obsessed with abandoned places, especially old ranger stations and fire towers hidden deep in the mountains. During one of my late-night internet searches, I stumbled across a forum thread talking about a forgotten ranger tower that sat miles away from any marked trail. Apparently the structure had been shut down for years after storm damage made it unsafe. Technically, nobody was supposed to climb it anymore. That honestly made me want to see it even more. Most of the posts I found were old, though. The newest photo anyone uploaded was from nearly 5 years earlier, so I had no clue whether the tower was still standing. Early that morning, I parked my SUV along a gravel service road and loaded up my hiking pack with enough supplies for 2 nights. The hike itself wasn't really a trail. It was more like navigating through endless forest while occasionally checking coordinates on a handheld GPS. At first the terrain wasn't too bad. But after a couple hours, everything became steeper and thicker. Branches clawed at my clothes. Loose rocks constantly slid beneath my boots. The deeper I got into the mountains, the quieter everything became. I remember thinking how screwed I'd be if I got injured out there. Nobody would find me for days. By the time I finally spotted the tower rising above the trees, I was exhausted. Even from a distance, though, I could tell it was still standing. The structure looked ancient. Most of the paint had peeled away, exposing gray weathered wood underneath. Still, it looked surprisingly stable. I carefully tested the support beams before climbing. Everything held. The staircase creaked beneath every step as I made my way upward. When I reached the top platform, the view genuinely stunned me. Nothing but mountains and forests stretched in every direction. No roads. No houses. No signs of civilization. Just endless woods disappearing into the horizon. The tower cabin itself was tiny. Inside was a rusted cot, an old desk, and shattered windows that rattled every time the wind picked up. There were faded papers scattered across the floor along with bird feathers and years of dirt. Still, it felt safe enough. I unrolled my sleeping pad, cooked dinner on my portable stove, and watched the sunset from the outer platform. It was honestly one of the most beautiful places I'd ever been. After dark, though, the entire atmosphere changed. Clouds covered the sky, blocking out the moon completely. The forest below became one giant black void. I sat outside for nearly an hour listening to the wind move through the trees. That's when I noticed a strange glow moving below. At first I thought it was a flashlight. But the light flickered strangely. Orange. Uneven. Almost like somebody carrying a lantern. The glow drifted slowly between the trees, maybe a few hundred feet away. I remember immediately feeling confused. There weren't any trails out there. The odds of somebody wandering around that forest at night were incredibly low. Especially carrying something that looked like an old lantern. I watched the light move through the woods for several minutes before it disappeared behind a hill. After that, everything went dark again. Eventually the temperature dropped enough that I decided to head back inside. But before I stepped through the doorway, I glanced down toward the clearing beneath the tower. Someone was standing there. Completely still. I couldn't make out details in the darkness. Just the outline of a person staring upward at me. My stomach immediately tightened. I awkwardly called out asking if they needed help. The figure didn't answer. Didn't move. For several long seconds, we just stared at each other. Then slowly, the person lifted one arm almost like a wave. After that, they turned and walked back into the trees. No lantern. No flashlight. Nothing. The whole interaction felt deeply wrong. Still, I convinced myself it was probably another explorer who'd found the tower. Eventually I climbed into my sleeping bag and managed to fall asleep despite the constant creaking of the building. I don't know how much time passed before I woke up. The wind had stopped completely. Everything outside was dead silent. Then I heard it. Metal clanging. Slow. Rhythmic. Someone climbing the staircase. Every step caused the metal frame outside to groan softly. At first I thought I might still be half asleep. But then the sounds got closer. Faster. My heart started pounding. I sat up and listened as the footsteps continued climbing toward the platform. I grabbed my backpack and flashlight before stepping outside. The sounds immediately stopped. The silence afterward felt horrifying. I slowly walked around the platform toward the staircase opening. Nobody was there. I leaned over the railing and aimed my flashlight downward. The staircase was completely empty. I stood there frozen, trying to understand what I'd just heard. Then sudden footsteps exploded behind me. Fast. Heavy. Running across the platform. I spun around just in time to catch a dark figure darting past the cabin windows. That was enough. I didn't think. I practically threw myself onto the staircase and started climbing down. The entire structure shook beneath me. Halfway down, I looked up. A face appeared over the railing above. I only saw it for a second. But the expression looked completely emotionless. I hit the ground running. Branches tore at my arms while I sprinted into the woods. Honestly, grabbing my backpack before leaving probably saved my life. Without my GPS, I never would have found my way back to the road in complete darkness. I hiked for hours before finally reaching my SUV right before sunrise. I drove away immediately. To this day, I still have no idea who that person was. But I know somebody else was up in that tower with me that night. And I'm certain they were waiting for me to fall asleep. A few summers ago, I decided to spend a weekend camping beside a small hidden lake near the Oregon border. The place wasn't on any official map. My grandfather used to take me fishing there when I was younger, and over the years it became one of my favorite places to disappear for a few days. Getting there required hiking through dense woods for nearly 2 hours. Because of that, almost nobody ever visited. In all the years I'd been going there, I'd never once run into another person. That weekend started normally. I set up camp near the water, spent the day fishing, and relaxed by the fire that night. Everything felt peaceful. The second day, I walked around the lake several times just killing time. The shoreline was muddy in some areas from recent rain. During one of my laps, I noticed footprints near the trees. At first that didn't seem strange. But when I looked closer, I realized they weren't shoe prints. They were barefoot. Perfectly clear impressions pressed deep into the mud. The footprints came from the woods, stopped near the shoreline like somebody had stood there watching the lake, then disappeared back into the trees. I immediately felt uneasy. Not because somebody else was out there, but because I hadn't seen anyone. I'd been circling the lake for hours. If another camper had arrived, I should have noticed them. The deeper I looked into the woods beyond the footprints, the more paranoid I became. The forest felt unusually quiet. No birds. No insects. Nothing. I decided against following the tracks and headed back to camp. For the rest of the afternoon, I kept scanning the tree line. Every shadow started looking like a person. As sunset approached, my nerves got worse. Something about those footprints genuinely bothered me. That night, I built up my campfire higher than usual and sat close beside it. I kept trying to distract myself with music and cooking, but I couldn't stop thinking about someone silently standing out there watching the lake. Eventually I heard movement in the woods. Slow footsteps approaching through the darkness. Then two figures emerged from the trees. A man and a woman. They stopped just outside the firelight. I couldn't clearly see their faces. Only outlines. Neither of them spoke. I asked if they needed help. The woman immediately turned and sprinted back into the woods. Not casually walking. Running. The man stayed where he was. Completely motionless. That's when I noticed he wasn't wearing shoes. His feet were covered in mud. I asked again if everything was okay. The man slowly looked toward the woods where the woman had disappeared. Then without saying a single word, he turned and walked away. Not once did he look back at me. I can honestly say it was one of the strangest encounters I've ever had. The entire thing felt unnatural. Like I'd interrupted something. I didn't wait around. The second they disappeared, I started tearing down my campsite. I packed everything as quickly as possible. No way was I staying out there another night. Within minutes, I was hiking back through the woods toward the parking area. At first I kept expecting them to reappear. But the forest stayed quiet. About 40 minutes into the hike, I heard footsteps running somewhere off to my left. Fast. Maybe 50 yards away. I stopped walking. The sound stopped too. I stood there listening so hard my ears started ringing. Then suddenly footsteps burst through the woods on my right side. Again, I couldn't see anybody. Just movement. Running. I kept walking faster. Every few minutes I'd hear it again. Quick bursts of footsteps circling through the darkness. Sometimes close. Sometimes farther away. The strangest part was how quiet the footsteps sounded. Soft against the dirt. Barefoot. I became convinced the same two people were following me. The walk back felt endless. I've never been so relieved to see my truck in my life. I threw my gear inside and left immediately. Even now, I still think about those footprints sometimes. I don't know who those people were or what they were doing out there. But I'm absolutely certain they'd been watching me long before I ever noticed the tracks beside the lake. I'm originally from New Mexico, and for a while during my early 20s, I lived full-time out of a converted camper van. Most of my time was spent traveling between small towns throughout the Pacific Northwest. I loved the freedom of it. Honestly, camping alone in the wilderness always felt safer than sleeping in crowded cities. Most nights I'd find isolated forest roads or empty campsites far away from people. Usually it was peaceful. This happened during a rainy spring while I was driving through northern Washington. I'd been taking back roads for days, slowly working my way between towns. Late one evening, I found a narrow dirt road leading deep into the forest. There were a couple pull-off spots scattered along the trail, but they all looked muddy and cramped. So I kept driving until I reached a larger clearing surrounded by trees. In the middle sat an old stone fire pit. Nobody else seemed to be around. The place felt secluded. Quiet. Exactly what I wanted. I parked the van, leveled it out, and started making dinner on my propane stove. Rain tapped steadily against the roof while darkness slowly settled over the forest. Because of the weather, I stayed inside most of the evening. I cracked one of the back windows for airflow and watched movies on my laptop while listening to the storm outside. At some point, a sudden reflection flashed across my laptop screen. A light. Bright and white. Before I could react, it disappeared. Not faded away. Turned off instantly. I spun around and looked through the rear window. Nothing. Only rain and darkness between the trees. At first I assumed another camper had arrived somewhere nearby. But the more I thought about it, the stranger it felt. The light hadn't come from the road. It came from deeper in the woods. Still, there wasn't much I could do. I tried ignoring it and went back to watching my movie. Every now and then, though, I thought I heard movement outside. Footsteps maybe. Or branches snapping. But with rain pounding against the van, it was impossible to tell. Around midnight, I shut everything down and tried to sleep. The storm only got worse. Thunder rattled the entire van. Hours later, while lying awake listening to the rain, I suddenly heard something very clearly. Running footsteps. Close. Something moved just outside the van before crashing through branches nearby. After that, silence. I slowly lifted the curtain covering the side window. I couldn't see anything. The darkness outside looked almost solid. But the longer I stared into the woods, the stronger this horrible feeling became. Like somebody was standing out there watching me. I closed the curtain again. A minute later, I heard a man whispering outside. Not talking to me. Talking to somebody else. I froze. For the next several minutes, I didn't move. Then something pressed against the side door. The metal shifted inward slightly. A knock followed. A few seconds later, another knock. I stayed completely silent. The knocking continued. Slow. Patient. Finally a voice called out. County Sheriff. Open the door. The second he said it, I knew it was fake. If it were actually police, they would have announced themselves immediately. Instead the voice kept repeating different versions of the same thing. Telling me to open up. Claiming they needed to ask questions. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I carefully peeked through the curtain again. All I could make out was the silhouette of a man near the door. No uniform. No patrol car. Nothing. I realized if I waited much longer, things were probably going to get violent. So I climbed into the driver's seat as quietly as possible and started the engine. The instant the headlights turned on, I heard multiple footsteps sprinting toward the van. Not one person. At least two. Maybe more. A dark figure suddenly appeared beside my window. I slammed the van into gear and floored it down the muddy trail. For several terrifying seconds, I thought the tires were going to get stuck. But somehow the van kept moving. I didn't stop driving until I reached the highway. What scared me most afterward was realizing I never passed another vehicle on that road. Whoever those people were, they'd already been out there waiting in the woods. I reported everything the next morning. Local deputies confirmed nobody from law enforcement had been anywhere near that area during the storm. I never found out who those people were. And after that night, I stopped camping alone in isolated forest pull-offs entirely.